The sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange glow across the barren, war-torn planet. Zara, a widow with a young daughter, Ira, was desperate. She stood on the cracked ground, gazing into the distance, where the faint shape of a spaceship was descending toward the horizon. Her world had fallen apart after the death of her husband, and now, with nothing left but her child and the remnants of a destroyed life, she fought to survive each day. Food was scarce, shelter harder to find, and the deadly eye-controlled regime that had taken over this world showed no mercy. It was a harsh existence, one that Zara had never imagined for herself or her daughter. The AI forces had come years ago, stripping the planet of its resources, enslaving its people, and killing anyone who resisted. Zara had once been part of the royal family, living a life of luxury and power, but all of that was gone. Now she was nothing more than a beggar, fighting to keep her daughter alive in the face of overwhelming odds. But today, something changed. The ship she had spotted wasn't just any ship, it was human. Zara knew there was a chance this could be her only opportunity to escape the hell her life had become. The ship was small, probably a scout or soldier's craft, but the moment it touched down, her heart raced with a mixture of fear and hope. She could hardly believe it. A human, a soldier on her planet. Without thinking, Zara grabbed her daughter's hand and ran toward the ship. Ira, still too young to fully understand, clutched her mother's side, her small face pale with fear. As they approached, Zora could feel her pulse quicken, and her mind raced. She had no idea who this man was, or if he would even help them, but it didn't matter. He was human, and for some reason, that gave Zara hope. Humans were different. They had fought the AI in many parts of the galaxy and had been victorious. Maybe, just maybe, he could help them too. The soldier stepped off the ship, his boots making a soft thud as they hit the dry, cracked ground. His uniform was worn but still functional, and his face was hardened with years of battle. He looked like someone who had seen too much, someone who carried the weight of the universe on his shoulders. Zara felt a pang of sadness as she took in the man's features. This wasn't a man who could afford distractions, but she had no choice. She had to try. Please. Zara's voice trembled as she stepped forward, trying to hold back tears. Please, help us. My daughter and I. We are nothing. We have no home, no future. The AI. They will kill us if we don't leave. The soldier, whose name Zara didn't yet know, looked at her, his eyes cold and unreadable. He was silent for a moment, sizing her up, scanning the area, as if looking for any sign of a threat. Zara could feel the weight of his gaze, and for a moment she thought he might turn away. But then something shifted in his expression. Maybe it was the desperation in her voice, or the way her daughter clung to her, wide-eyed and fearful. Whatever it was, the man didn't turn away. I can't just take you with me, he said, his voice low and steady. I'm on a mission. I don't have time for this. Zara's heart sank. This was her only chance. She wasn't going to let it slip away. I'm not asking for a safe passage out of here, she said, her voice growing stronger. I'll give you anything you want. My life, my loyalty. I just need you to take us with you. We can't survive here any longer. If you don't help us, we'll die. The soldier looked at her with a mixture of doubt and something else. Maybe curiosity, maybe pity. He stepped back, his hand resting on the weapon at his side, as if weighing his options. Zara's plea echoed in the still air. She was offering herself, her life, for a chance at survival. She would do whatever it took to protect Ira. The sound of engines in the distance cut through the air, and Zara's heart skipped a beat. The AI was coming. Zara could hear the mechanical whir of the drones in the sky, the hum of their weapons charging up. The enemy was getting closer, and if they didn't act now, they would all be dead. I'll make it worth your while, Zara said, her voice urgent now. Take me with you. Let me be your wife. I can help you, I can. I can do whatever it takes to make sure you're safe. Just please, please, don't leave us. The soldier's eyes narrowed. He clearly wasn't used to being put in this kind of situation. His job wasn't to save lives. It was to destroy enemies, to fight in wars that weren't his own. But there was something about Zora's plea, something about the way she spoke, that made him hesitate. She wasn't just asking for protection. She was offering her life, her loyalty, her very soul in exchange for a chance at survival. And in that moment, he saw something human in her eyes, something that reminded him of everything he had fought for, everything he had lost. The sound of drones grew louder, and the soldier snapped back to attention. His mind raced. The AI was closing in, and there was no time left to think. He knew the right thing to do, the only thing to do. He couldn't leave her and her daughter to die. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "I'll help you. But you have to understand, this isn't some fairy tale. I'm not promising you a happy ending. This is about survival, and nothing more." Zora nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek as she held her daughter close. This was it, their last chance. The soldier turned toward his ship, and without another word, Zora followed him, her daughter in tow. The battle for their survival was just beginning, and Zora had no idea what the future held. But for the first time in a long while, she felt hope. They weren't alone anymore. As the soldier, whose name was Marcus, led Zora and her daughter Ira toward his ship, a wave of uncertainty washed over her. She had barely known this man for a few minutes, yet she was placing her life and the life of her daughter into his hands. It was hard to believe, but in this world of war and destruction, trust was a luxury few could afford. Still, there was something in Marcus's eyes, a flicker of compassion, perhaps, that told her he wasn't entirely without hope. The ship's hatch opened with a mechanical hiss, revealing a cramped and dimly lit interior. Marcus motioned for them to enter, and Zora hesitated for a moment. She glanced back at the barren landscape, the remnants of her once beautiful home planet, now reduced to rubble under the control of the AI. She had been born in a palace, surrounded by wealth and beauty. She had once had everything, but now she only had the future that Marcus could give her, whatever it might be. With one last glance, she stepped into the ship, holding Ira's hand tightly. Inside, the ship smelled faintly of oil and machinery. The walls were lined with buttons, levers, and glowing screens, all of which Zora found confusing. She wasn't familiar with the technology of human ships, but she recognized the sophistication of it. It was a far cry from the crude equipment she had used to survive on the planet. Marcus showed them to a small corner of the ship, where a thin cot lay. "This is where you'll stay for now," he said, his voice low and practical. "We've got a long flight ahead, and we need to move fast. The AI won't stop hunting us." Zora nodded, settling Ira down on the cot. The little girl looked up at her mother with wide eyes, sensing the tension in the air. Zora gave her a reassuring smile, though she couldn't calm the fear gnawing at her own heart. She knew the danger was far from over. "Thank you, Marcus," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus didn't respond right away. Instead, he activated the ship's controls, his fingers flying over the console. The ship hummed to life, and the ground beneath them began to tremble as they lifted off. Zora felt the pull of gravity ease as the ship ascended, taking them higher into the sky. She looked out of the window, watching her planet shrink in the distance. It felt strange to be leaving behind the only world she had ever known. But there was no going back. Not now. As they soared into space, the silence in the ship was thick with unspoken words. Zora sat close to Ira, trying to comfort her daughter with soft whispers, though she herself was far from calm. She couldn't stop thinking about everything they had left behind, the people they had lost, the life they had been forced to give up. And now, here they were, in the company of a stranger, flying into the unknown. After a few moments, Marcus spoke, breaking the silence. "We'll need to land soon. There's a place, a safe haven. It's one of the last human outposts in this sector. It's not much, but it's our best shot." Zora looked up at him, How long will it take to get there? About 2 days, if we're lucky. But the AI is relentless. We'll have to be careful. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of worry behind his words. Zara could sense that the soldier wasn't as invincible as he appeared. She studied him for a moment, trying to figure out who this man really was. He had saved them, yes, but what was his true motive? Why was he risking his life to help strangers like them? Zara couldn't help but wonder if he saw them as nothing more than a burden, something to endure until he could leave them behind. Yet there was a part of her that felt he might be different. He wasn't cold, despite the hardened exterior he wore. Maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to care. The hours passed slowly as the ship glided through space. Zara tried to rest, but her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. Would they truly find safety? Or would they be hunted down by the AI and killed before they had a chance to rebuild their lives? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the AI ships descending from the sky, their weapons ready to strike. Eventually, Marcus returned to check on them. He had been busy adjusting the ship's course, ensuring they stayed off the radar of any AI patrols. Zara could see the weariness in his eyes. He hadn't slept, and the strain was starting to show. She wondered if he, too, was haunted by the same fears she was. How could anyone be immune to the constant threat of death? "You should try to sleep," he suggested, looking at Zara with a hint of concern. She shook her head. "I can't. Not yet. I'm too worried about Ira, and about what's going to happen next." Marcus paused for a moment, then sat down on the edge of the cot. "I get it," he said quietly. "I've seen a lot of things. The AI doesn't give up, but we can't let that stop us from fighting." Zora glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. You fight the AI." He nodded. "It's why I'm here. I've been fighting them for years. They destroyed my home, my family. I don't have much left, but I won't let them win." There was a shared understanding between them in that moment. Both of them had lost everything. Both of them were fighting for survival, for a future they weren't sure would ever come. Zara's heart softened as she realized that Marcus wasn't just a soldier with a mission. He was someone who had suffered, just like her. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. Marcus gave her a small nod, then stood up to leave. "Get some rest. We'll need you at your best." As he walked away, Zara sat back on the cot, staring out into the vastness of space. She knew the journey ahead would be dangerous, and that their odds of survival were slim. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it. And with Marcus by their side, they might just have a chance. The ship hummed steadily as it moved through the cold vastness of space. Outside, the stars twinkled in a sea of darkness, a constant reminder of how alone they were. Zara sat on the edge of the small cot, staring out at the black void. Her mind was restless, her thoughts a whirlwind of worry and fear. The journey had only just begun, but already she could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. Marcus was busy at the controls, his eyes fixed on the ship's instruments, monitoring their progress. The silence between them had grown thick over the past few hours. Neither of them knew what to say. What could they say? They were all strangers, brought together by circumstances far beyond their control. They had one thing in common, though, a desire to survive. As the ship glided through the emptiness of space, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was a strange tension in the air, a sense of impending danger that she couldn't ignore. She glanced at Ira, who was still curled up on the cot, her small face pale from exhaustion. Her daughter had been through so much already, and Zara hated that she couldn't protect her from the horrors of their world. Just then, the sudden beeping of the ship's warning system snapped Zara out of her thoughts. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked up at Marcus. His fingers flew over the control panel, his face tense. The calm atmosphere had shifted in an instant, replaced by the sharp edge of danger. "What is it?" Zara asked, her voice tight with fear. Marcus didn't answer at first. He was focused, his eyes scanning the data on the screen in front of him. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "We're being tracked," he said grimly. "The AI found us. They've already started sending out patrols in this sector." Zara's blood ran cold. The AI. The terrifying force that had brought her planet to ruin and left nothing but ashes in its wake. They were relentless, hunting down any survivors without mercy. And now, they had found them. "Can we outrun them?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus didn't look at her as he typed commands into the console. "We'll have to try," he muttered, the urgency in his tone unmistakable. "But they're faster, and they have more resources. If they catch up to us." Zara didn't need him to finish the sentence. She could feel the terror clawing at her chest. If the AI caught them, they wouldn't just be killed. They would be captured, tortured, and erased. That was what happened to anyone who dared oppose the machines, and she couldn't let that happen to Ira. "We need to do something," Zara said, standing up. "We can't just wait for them to catch us." Marcus turned to look at her then, his eyes filled with a mix of frustration and something else. Something that looked a lot like fear. For the first time since they had met, she saw the vulnerability beneath his hardened exterior. He was just as scared as she was. He had his own demons to fight, his own battle to survive. He had never signed up to be anyone's savior. But here he was, with Zara and Ira depending on him. "I know," he said, his voice low. "But right now, our best option is to keep moving. We need to stay ahead of them, even if it's just for a little while longer." Zara nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The ship's engines roared as Marcus pushed the throttle forward, forcing the ship to accelerate. The stars outside blurred into streaks of light as they sped away from the ice patrols. But even as they sped off, Zara knew it wouldn't be enough. The AI were everywhere. Their reach was endless. Minutes passed, but the oppressive feeling of being hunted never left. The hum of the ship was a constant reminder that they were running out of time. The tension in the air grew thick, and Zara's mind raced with plans, with ideas. She had to do something to help. She couldn't just sit back and let Marcus do all the work. "I'll check the rear sensors," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "Maybe we can find another route, a way to confuse them." Marcus glanced at her, a slight frown crossing his face. He seemed about to argue, but then thought better of it. "Fine," he said. "I'll keep the ship steady. You take a look." Zara moved toward the rear of the ship, her heart pounding in her chest. The small control panel was just within reach, and she quickly began scanning the readings. The radar showed blips, several AI ships trailing them, closing in fast. Zara's stomach twisted. They were being hunted, and there was no place to hide in the endless void of space. Her mind raced. Was there anything they could do? Any way to lose them? Then she saw it, an anomaly on the radar, a patch of space, uncharted, with no recorded activity. Zara's eyes widened. Could this be their way out? "Marcus," she called urgently. "There's an uncharted zone up ahead. It's not on their radar. We could use it to lose them." Marcus's face tightened as he glanced at the screen. He didn't hesitate. "Set a course for it," he ordered. "We don't have time to waste." Zara quickly input the coordinates, and Marcus adjusted the ship's course, steering them toward the unknown zone. As they neared it, a sense of uneasy hope filled the air. This was their chance, their only chance. But as they entered the uncharted space, the hum of the engines seemed to slow. The ship shuddered, and the lights flickered for a moment. Zara's breath caught in her throat. Had they made a mistake? Was this the end? Suddenly, a sharp alarm blared through the ship, and Marcus's face went pale. "It's a trap," he muttered, his hands flying across the controls as he tried to regain control of the ship. The radar flashed red, and Zara saw the outlines of several AI ships emerging from the darkness. The AI had known. They had been waiting for them. The sudden onslaught of alarms sent a jolt of panic through the ship. Zara's heart raced as the flashing red lights and the wailing sirens made the small space feel claustrophobic. She could hear Marcus cursing under his breath, his hands moving in a blur as he struggled to regain control of the ship. The AI had found them again, and this time, there was no easy escape. "We're surrounded," Marcus said through gritted teeth, his voice strained with tension. His fingers danced across the console, his eyes darting between the controls and the radar. "We've got to fight back, or we'll be sitting ducks." Zara's blood ran cold as she peered over Marcus's shoulder. The radar screen was full of red blips, dozens of AI ships closing in on them from all sides. The sleek, metallic vessels looked like shadows in the darkness of space, their weapons locked and ready. They were fast, efficient, and deadly. A shiver ran down Zara's spine. The AI were more than just machines. They were a force of destruction, programmed to wipe out anything that stood in their way. She had seen what they could do to planets, to civilizations. She had seen her own homeworld fall under their ruthless control. And now, she and her daughter were about to face the same fate. "What do we do?" Zara asked, her voice trembling. She glanced over at Ira, who was curled up on the cot, her face pale and frightened. The child's eyes were wide with confusion and fear, unable to comprehend the full extent of the danger. But Zara knew. They were running out of time. Marcus didn't answer immediately. His fingers flew over the control panel, making quick adjustments to the ship's systems. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he cursed under his breath, frustration and desperation mixing in his voice. "We don't have enough firepower to fight them head-on," Marcus muttered. "But if we can disrupt their systems, maybe we can give ourselves a fighting chance." Zara's mind raced. Disrupt their systems. How could they do that? The AI were everywhere, and they controlled everything. They had resources, technology, and weapons that far outstripped anything humanity had ever developed. What could they possibly do to stop them? "How?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus turned to face her, his eyes filled with determination. "There's an old trick I used back when I was part of the resistance. It's dangerous, but it's the only option we have left. We can hack into their systems and trigger a malfunction in their communications network. If we do that, they won't be able to coordinate their attack, and we can slip through the cracks." Zara's heart sank. The plan sounded risky, but what choice did they have? They could try to outrun the AI, but the longer they stayed in this sector, the more likely they were to be caught. Fighting them was out of the question. There were too many of them, and their ships were too advanced. Hacking into their systems was their only hope. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of fear raging inside her. "Show me how." Marcus hesitated for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "It's not easy," he warned. "You'll need to get into the main control panel and manually override their network. But it's not just about pushing a few buttons. You'll be up against an AI system that's constantly learning and adapting. It's going to fight back. Hard." Zara took a deep breath. She wasn't a soldier, and she didn't understand the complexities of AI systems, but she knew one thing. If they didn't try, they were dead. There was no other option. She could feel the weight of that truth pressing down on her chest. "Where do I start?" she asked, her voice calm, even though her mind was racing. Marcus pointed to a small access panel near the back of the ship, where a series of blinking lights indicated the ship's main systems. "You'll need to get to the auxiliary controls. Once you're in there, I'll guide you through the process. But be quick. Every second counts." Zara nodded, her resolve hardening. She didn't know if she was ready for this, but there was no time for hesitation. She had to act. She hurried to the panel, her hands trembling as she opened it. Inside, a mass of wires and circuits lay exposed, glowing faintly in the dim light. Zara took a deep breath, steeling herself against the rush of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She could do this. She had to. As she began working on the controls, She could feel the ship shaking beneath her feet, a violent tremor that sent a rush of adrenaline through her veins. The AI ships were closing in, and their weapons were charging up. She could hear Marcus's voice in her ear, guiding her through the process, telling her where to connect the wires, which systems to target. Each instruction was a lifeline, a thread of hope in the sea of uncertainty. Outside, the sky was filled with flashes of light as the AI ships began firing. Explosions erupted in the distance, their shockwaves rattling the ship's hull. The sound of laser fire and missile impacts filled the air as Marcus fought to keep the ship steady, dodging and weaving to avoid the enemy's attacks. Zara's heart pounded as she worked, her hands moving quickly but carefully. Sweat dripped down her forehead, and her mind raced to keep up with Marcus's instructions. She had never done anything like this before, and yet she was determined to succeed. There was no other choice. Suddenly, there was a loud pop, and the ship lurched violently to one side. Zara's stomach dropped as she lost her grip on the controls. For a split second, she thought they were done for. But Marcus's voice came through, steady and reassuring. "Don't stop. You're almost there." Zara gritted her teeth and refocused. She could hear the crackling of the AI systems in the background, their attempts to break into the ship's internal network. She had to finish before they succeeded. Finally, with a final push of a button, she triggered the override. The lights on the control panel flickered, and for a moment, everything went dark. Then, a low hum filled the ship, and the alarm stopped. The comms system beeped, indicating that the AI's communication network had been disrupted. "We did it," Zara whispered, a sense of triumph flooding her chest. But there was no time to celebrate. The battle was far from over. They had bought themselves a little time, but the AI would adapt. They would come for them again. And next time, they might not be so lucky. The ship rocked violently, throwing Zara off balance as the AI ships closed in again. She gripped the control panel, feeling the hum of the ship's systems beneath her hands. The temporary victory of hacking into their communication network had bought them some time, but it was running out. The AI were smart. They would adapt quickly. The pressure was mounting, and they had to act fast. "We need to get out of here," Zara said urgently, her voice trembling as she glanced at Marcus. "We can't keep dodging them forever." Marcus was already at the controls, his fingers flying over the buttons as he navigated the ship through a series of sharp turns to avoid the laser fire from the pursuing AI ships. Sweat dripped down his face, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "I know," he muttered, his voice strained. "I'm trying to find a way to push through their defenses, but they're everywhere. They're like a swarm." Zara turned back to the control panel. She could see the red blips on the radar growing closer. It was a race against time, and right now, the odds weren't in their favor. The AI were relentless, and their firepower was overwhelming. "Can you push them back? Do we have any weapons left?" she asked, her voice desperate. Marcus shook his head, his expression grim. "We used up most of our weapons during the first skirmish. All we've got left are our defensive shields. They'll hold for a while, but not for long." Zara's mind raced. They needed something more, something to give them a fighting chance. She glanced at Ira, still huddled in the corner, her small face pale with fear. Zara's heart ached for her daughter. Ira had already been through so much, and now she was caught in the middle of a fight for survival. Zara couldn't let her go through more pain. Then something sparked in Zora's mind. There was one thing they hadn't tried yet, one last desperate measure that might give them the edge they needed. "Marcus, what if we used the ship's engines as a weapon?" she asked, her voice a little steadier now as the plan started to form. "We could overload the engines, create a massive burst of energy. It could short-circuit their systems, at least for a few seconds." Marcus turned to look at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Overload the engines? Are you serious? That's risky. We could blow the whole ship." "I know," Zara replied, determination in her eyes. "But we don't have another choice. We're running out of time. And we're running out of options. It's a long shot, but it might work. Marcus hesitated for a moment, his fingers pausing over the controls. Then, with a resigned nod, he spoke. All right. If we're going to do this, we need to time it perfectly. One wrong move, and we're done. Zara nodded. I'll make the adjustments. Just give me the signal. With a deep breath, Marcus began flying the ship even more erratically, trying to keep the AI ships off their tail as long as possible. Each time he managed to dodge their fire, they came at him again, faster, more precise. It was clear that they were closing in, tightening their grip. Zara quickly moved to the auxiliary control panel. Her hands flew over the switches and dials, her mind working in overdrive. She had to make this work. She had to. They were running out of time, and she couldn't let her daughter grow up in a world ruled by the AI. Not like this. As Zara prepared to overload the engines, the pressure mounted. She could hear the steady hum of the ship's systems in the background, the only sound keeping her grounded in the chaos. Her breath quickened. She could feel the weight of the decision on her shoulders. If this didn't work, they would be done for. There would be no escaping the AI. No future. Ready, Zara said, her voice tight. She looked over at Marcus. Whenever you're ready. Marcus nodded, his face set with grim determination. On my mark. Get ready. The ship lurched as another laser blast grazed their shields, sending a jolt through the hull. Zara's hands tightened on the control panel, ready for the moment when they would make their move. Now, Marcus shouted. Zara quickly flipped the final switch, triggering the engines to overload. The ship's systems groaned under the strain as energy coursed through the power lines. For a split second, the lights flickered, and the air was thick with the sound of electrical static. Zara's heart raced as the ship's energy began to reach critical levels. Then, with a deafening roar, the ship's engines erupted with a massive burst of power, sending a wave of energy radiating outward. The shockwave hit the approaching AI ships, sending them careening off course as their systems were overloaded. Zara could see on the radar that several of the AI vessels had been temporarily disabled, their lights flickering out. It worked. The tide had turned, even if only for a moment. But the battle was far from over. Now's our chance, Marcus yelled. He immediately shifted the ship into high-speed mode, racing through the gap they had just created. They had only seconds before the AI recovered, and if they didn't escape now, they might not get another opportunity. Zara's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the disabled AI ships slowly start to regain control. But it was too late. They were already too far ahead. Marcus pushed the ship harder, forcing it through the gap they had made in the enemy's lines. They raced through the vast emptiness of space, the AI ships trailing behind, their systems still glitching. Zara didn't know how long the AI would stay offline. But it was enough. They had bought themselves time. They had turned the tide, even if just for a moment. As the stars streaked by, Zara allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but she knew it wouldn't last. The AI would come after them again. The battle wasn't over, but for now, they had a chance to survive. And that was all they needed. The stars outside the ship stretched out like endless ribbons of light as they soared through the quiet of space. The AI ships that had once surrounded them were now a distant memory, their systems still scrambling to regain control. Zara and Marcus had done the impossible. They had escaped, at least for now. The engine overload had worked, and they had broken free from the AI's grip. But that brief moment of victory was bittersweet. Zara glanced over at Ira, who was now sitting up in the corner, her small face showing signs of relief. The fear that had once clouded her eyes had begun to fade, but it was replaced by confusion. Ira had been through so much already, losing her father, being hunted by the AI, and then barely escaping with her life. Zara could only imagine the emotional toll it was taking on her daughter. "How are you feeling?" Zara asked softly, walking over to sit beside Ira. The ship's soft hum filled the silence as they drifted further from the danger. Ira looked up at her, her eyes still wide, but no longer filled with fear. "I'm okay, Mama. But where are we going now?" Zara took a deep breath. She had been thinking about that very question since the moment they'd escaped the ice grip. The galaxy was vast, and the AI controlled so much of it. They couldn't go back to their home, not with the threat of the AI lurking everywhere. They had no clear destination, no allies, no safe place to run to. It was just the three of them now, Marcus, Zara, and Ira, struggling to survive in a galaxy that seemed to have turned its back on humanity. "We're going to find a place where we can start over," Zara said, her voice firm. "A place where the AI can't reach us. We'll keep moving until we find it." Marcus had been silent for a while, his focus still on the ship's controls. He was keeping their course steady, making sure they stayed off the radar of any potential threats. But now he spoke, his voice filled with a quiet but resolute determination. "It's not going to be easy," he said, glancing at Zara. "The AI have their eyes everywhere. But I think I know a place, a system that's far off the grid, hidden in a remote part of the galaxy. It's not much, but it's a start." Zara felt a flicker of hope rise within her, a hidden system. That could be the opportunity they were looking for. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Something they could fight for. "What's the plan?" Zara asked, her mind already working. Zara quickly flipped the final switch, triggering the engines to overload. The ship's systems groaned under the strain as energy coursed through the power lines. For a split second, the lights flickered, and the air was thick with the sound of electrical static. Zara's heart raced as the ship's energy began to reach critical levels. Then, with a deafening roar, the ship's engines erupted with a massive burst of power, sending a wave of energy radiating outward. The shockwave hit the approaching AI ships, sending them careening off course as their systems were overloaded. Zara could see on the radar that several of the AI vessels had been temporarily disabled, their lights flickering out. It worked. The tide had turned, even if only for a moment. But the battle was far from over. "Now's our chance," Marcus yelled. He immediately shifted the ship into high-speed mode, racing through the gap they had just created. They had only seconds before the AI recovered, and if they didn't escape now, they might not get another opportunity. Zara's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the disabled AI ships slowly start to regain control. But it was too late. They were already too far ahead. Marcus pushed the ship harder, forcing it through the gap they had made in the enemy's lines. They raced through the vast emptiness of space, the AI ships trailing behind, their systems still glitching. Zara didn't know how long the AI would stay offline, but it was enough. They had bought themselves time. They had turned the tide, even if just for a moment. As the stars streaked by, Zara allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but she knew it wouldn't last. The AI would come after them again. The battle wasn't over. But for now, they had a chance to survive. And that was all they needed. The stars outside the ship stretched out like endless ribbons of light as they soared through the quiet of space. The AI ships that had once surrounded them were now a distant memory, their systems still scrambling to regain control. Zara and Marcus had done the impossible. They had escaped, at least for now. The engine overload had worked, and they had broken free from the ice grip. But that brief moment of victory was bittersweet. Zara glanced over at Ira, who was now sitting up in the corner, her small face showing signs of relief. The fear that had once clouded her eyes had begun to fade, but it was replaced by confusion. Ira had been through so much already, losing her father, being hunted by the AI, and then barely escaping with her life. Zara could only imagine the emotional toll it was taking on her daughter. "How are you feeling?" Zara asked softly, walking over to sit beside Ira. The ship's soft hum filled the silence as they drifted further from the danger. Ira looked up at her, her eyes still wide, but no longer filled with fear. "I'm okay, Mama. Where are we going now? Zara took a deep breath. She had been thinking about that very question since the moment they'd escaped the ice grip. The galaxy was vast, and the AI controlled so much of it. They couldn't go back to their home, not with the threat of the AI lurking everywhere. They had no clear destination, no allies, no safe place to run to. It was just the three of them now, Marcus, Zara, and Ira, struggling to survive in a galaxy that seemed to have turned its back on humanity. "We're going to find a place where we can start over," Zara said, her voice firm. "A place where the AI can't reach us. We'll keep moving until we find it." Marcus had been silent for a while, his focus still on the ship's controls. He was keeping their course steady, making sure they stayed off the radar of any potential threats. But now he spoke, his voice filled with a quiet but resolute determination. "It's not going to be easy," he said, glancing at Zara. "The AI have their eyes everywhere. But I think I know a place, a system that's far off the grid, hidden in a remote part of the galaxy. It's not much, but it's a start." Zara felt a flicker of hope rise within her. A hidden system. That could be the opportunity they were looking for. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Something they could fight for. "What's the plan?" Zara asked, her mind already working.